So when it comes to religion, people tend to think it in clusters. For example, Christian religion is different from the Buddhist religion, and Islam is different from Christians, and so on. So this idea that a religion is associated with a particular organization or a sect is really prevailing, and many thinkers approach the problem of religion from this assumption that it is an organizational thing. But if you consider religion as something that is related to uh, investigation of the truth of this universe and search for values and meanings of life, and then it becomes more free, and we don't really have to be tethered to this idea of organization. In the brain, several locations, several areas of the neural circuits considered to be involved in religious experience. For example, the temporal parietal junction, where we have this embodied cognition of ourselves and the environment, and the parietal cortex, where bodily information are processed, and embodiment in a certain environment has a lot to do with religious and mystical experience. And so there are these brain areas that are associated with religious experience. And, for example, when a Buddhist meditate, he or she might try to come to a certain level of enlightenment. In the Buddhist tradition, it is considered that there are 52 stages of enlightenment, or metacognition, if you like. When you have a higher perception of what these elements that are involved in on self-awareness and the perception of the world and the self. So so when you meditate in a Buddhist temple, for example, you might think that it is a Buddhist act, but it's not. It's just something that our brain goes through, and the fruits, so to speak, of such an experiment can be treated independently of any religious organization or system. So when it comes to science, it is really commonplace idea to take data from many different disciplines. For example, physics and biology are different fields, ostensibly, but you can combine the knowledge from the physics and biology and combine it to, for example, biophysics. And that's actually what I studied for my PhD thesis. But many combinations can be possible. You can combine chemistry and biology, and you have molecular biology. So these schools of thought that you conveniently a label to each field of activity in science are not really absolute. I mean, you can overcome these borders and fuse them to come to a higher understanding of the world as we know it. So why don't we do that with religion? It doesn't make sense. I mean, this idea of God, many people have touched upon the idea of God. For example, Samuel Beckett wrote a play on it. And of course, Spinoza, he wrote many interesting thoughts on the concept of God. Even Albert Einstein commented on the concept of God, and he said that he probably could believe in God as depicted by Spinoza. So there are many different ideas about God. God as the creator of the universe, or God as somebody who would observe us and appraise us and rewards or punishes us, or God as somebody who would probably listen to our prayers and maybe answer to them, or a God as somebody who is benevolent, or a God as somebody who is vengeful, and all these different concepts of God. But So it is interesting to talk about God, whether you are an atheist or not. I mean, as I mentioned in my earlier video posting, just being an atheist is not intellectually very challenging at this time of the day. I mean, at this time and day, because it's something trivial to be an atheist. I mean, if you understand modern science and if you understand the foundations of physical laws, for example, then it of course becomes impossible to maintain the traditional classic concept of God. So so it's no wonder that many intellectuals subscribe to the atheist idea, but it's not. It's not something that demands a lot of intellectual challenge. I mean, it's something that is obvious and it's a no-brainer. So the fact that time passes and the fact that the universe exists and the fact that we exist and the fact that our brain gives rise to conscious experience, these are no-brainer. Really, Dingen sich and phenomena on dich and dich and sich and my German is kind of rusty now. That is so. So it is a very interesting intellectual endeavor to come to a deeper understanding of this concept of God, and whether in the historical sense or whether in the literal sense, or in all possible senses. I mean, it is very interesting to consider the concept of God, and when we do that, we should really, really, go away from this sect mindset. I mean, you name a particular school of religion and you try to adhere to that. That is not the way to go forward. I mean, we should, if you like, do a process of cherry picking from the best of religious thoughts from all over the world, including probably one from this country, Japan, where the Japanese traditionally believed that there were actually 8 million gods, where 8 million actually stands for infinity. And in Japanese traditional Shinto belief, a human being is considered to become a god once he or she dies. And, of course, this sounds, too superstitional from today's point of view. But there are some interesting thoughts on it. I mean, for example, there was this really famous Japanese literary critic, Hideo Kobayashi, who said that human beings, when they are alive, are just like animals. And when they die, when they pass away, and if you remember a person, particular person, this person becomes more and more purely human. Like in the case of Albert Einstein, for example, I a great Albert Einstein fan, and I, studied his biography and his theory when I was a kid, starting from maybe 10 years old. And I am still a really great fan of Albert Einstein. But when Albert Einstein was living, he was an animal as much as a human being. All of us are animals, as much as human beings. But when we pass away and when people remember us, you would feel that there are increasingly, pure concept or embodiment, if you like, of that person, as if, for example, Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, we have this concept of Leonardo da Vinci, which becomes purer and purer as time passes. But when Leonardo da Vinci was alive, I presume that he was as much an animal as we all of us are. And so this concept of Leonardo da Vinci as a human becomes purer and purer as time passes. So this is a really interesting concept to come from Japan's Shinto religion, because in which it said that a person becomes a god, which is another way to say that a person becomes more pure human, the embodiment of a more purer human conceptualization as time passes after he or she passes away. So this is an interesting idea. But you don't have to say that this is Japan's Shinto system. I mean, you don't have to say that because you can just pick these interesting ideas from the many different endeavors that have been going on historically, and in current times all over the world, and we can maybe synthesize these different ideas, just like scientists do, and come up with something that is both intellectually interesting and convincing, and also something that wouldn't rely too much on fanciful ideas. So I think we can do that, and I think there are open possibilities for that. So that's why I am, actively interested in thinking about these things. I feel that, just to expand in terms of physical laws, in terms of theory of everything, the proceedings in the universe is not sufficient. I don't think that's sufficient. I mean, that's a no-brainer. And, there's something amiss. And it'll be interesting to feel that whole. So, as I said, just being an atheist is not intellectually challenging. It's a no-brainer. And when we endeavor to find something interesting, intellectually and emotionally, we really need to, go away from this organizational or systems, oriented and systems limited thinking of the world of religion.